What's going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me. It's What's the 411? We are on the last Monday of April. I can't believe how quickly this month has just gone by. I am really just hoping that summer starts summering because I'm ready for the nice weather, right?
Oh my God. Come on now, let's go.
Right? Okay. Well, I am extremely excited. I have a great guest to chat with me today. His name is Jermaine Morrison, but you know what? I'm not going to introduce him. I'm going to allow him to introduce himself, tell you all about the great things that he has going on. Go ahead, Jermaine.
I know nothing. I'm joking. I'm joking. Hi everybody. So my name is Jermaine Morrison. I am a registered social worker and I am a psychotherapist with Francis Psychotherapy. Um, Really, I've been kind of doing this whole social work thing for the past 20 plus years. I also work for the school board as well in Toronto. Um, Really, I've been able to be a part of a lot of community events, worked with a lot of different agencies and organizations, including Seneca College, the City of Toronto, York University, just to name a few. And sometimes trying to introduce myself to remember all the stuff that I've done, I'm not very good at it. But one thing that you will know about me is that I do have a very deep passion about mental health and mental health in our Black community.
Love to hear it. And it's very modest, guys. He's really doing a lot of work in the community. So, you got to big up yourself on that one. Out here for 22 years, I was really just like, okay, Black don't crack. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. So tell everybody how you got started in social work in the school.
Sure. Social work is something that I gravitated to, especially just coming out of high school. And I think for me, what was the biggest thing was looking at how our people have been underserved. We as a community, Black community, been have been born to oppression for the longest time. And one of the things that I think for me as a social worker, I wanted to do was really be a positive influence in my community in some way, shape, or form. Um, to basically, yeah, just to be that voice and to be that person where we're putting in the work so that our community in general can be better than what it was before. And I think that's what drove my decision to be a social worker and, having being able to be a part of, different genres of social work, whether it be in education or community development, mental health in particular. It's something that has been a great journey thus far, and I've been able to get a lot of perspectives and a lot of tools for where that's happening moving forward.
hmm and I was honored to have you as a speaker at a seat at our table this last past event that we just hosted in April. It was, sorry, not in April, in
Yeah.
March. It was great. It seems
Well,
like it was just the other day, right?
honestly, the pleasure was all mine, to be quite honest with you. Like, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, I felt extremely honored by yourself coming out there, sharing your story, talking to us, about especially about mental health, because there's so many different um, things that make mental health conversations so important. So
Mhm.
talk to us a little bit about mental health and what the conversation around mental health, what it means to you.
So mental health is because here's the thing, mental health has been sort of like the sexy subject over the past number of years. I think COVID definitely has exposed a lot of things.
Mhm.
And when we talk about mental health, it's an encompassing term, right? Basically, it's a term that we use that just describes a person's mental state. It's much different compared to mental illness. Mental illness is pretty much kind of like poor mental health, like, and it manifests itself in so many ways, like things like depression, suicidal ideations, um, traumas, um, anxieties, for example, just things like that. Neurodivergence, to a certain degree. But but mental health for me, when I think about it, is just an all-encompassing term. Looking at and describing a person's mental state, it could be positive or negative, but it's just an all-encompassing term that focuses on the overall mental well-being of a person, of a human being.
Mhm. And that's important to know the difference between mental health and mental illness because I feel like sometimes we might misconstrue those two terms. Like, I think people kind of just use them and they don't really know
Yeah.
what exactly they mean.
Yeah, and that's why like it's important to be educated, because what tends to happen, and not to necessarily go off on a tangent, but even for me, sometimes if I'm not careful, it's easy to equate mental health to mental illness, which is not true, right? Mental illness will, again, it is negative thoughts and behaviors that have occurred over time. A lot of it is a result of trauma. A lot of it also could be biological effects and stuff. Um, and it manifests itself into so many different behaviors that not only affect the person individually, but affects families and loved ones.
Mhm. You just said something that I've always kind of, I mean, I hear different things about it, but
Mhm.
can mental illness really be passed down through the bloodline? Is it something that our family can pass along to us?
Well, there has been a lot of studies shown that there's a high probability that, for example, if you have a family member um, who has suffered with some sort of mental illness, right? Um, it may not be necessarily exact same as, like, say your kids might not experience the exact same thing, but there will be another manifestation of it. So for example, if let's just say a father has been for the longest time dealing with some sort of manic episode, or even things like post-traumatic distress syndrome, sorry, I always say it properly, but PTSD, right? Um, Sometimes if they're having to deal with that, it may be a situation where maybe one of their kids might be struggling with some sort of anxiety disorder, right? It has happened on a number of occasions, um, especially with a few of the clients that I've worked with. So, it's important to have those type of conversations so that it's best to kind of like not only understand where everything's coming from, but what are the best treatments and the best modalities to kind of cope with the situation.
Hmm. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for those definitions there.
Mhm.
So talk to us a bit about social work. Talk to us about the work that you do in the school
Mhm.
and the different types of impacts you make on the children that are with you.
So I've been with the board for like what, 21 years. Somebody out there is just like, what? Yeah. And most of what I've started with, so I started with in the beginning working with kids with behavioral issues, right? Of various kinds. I used to work in a behavioral class, and a lot of these kids are angry a lot. A lot of them have been abused quite a bit, or neglected. Um, and and a lot of the kids are sometimes in environments where it's a bit unstructured. Sometimes you do have kids that are coming from very underserved neighborhoods and stuff. So, hence they somewhat become the product of their environment, to say the least, right? And so, and only not only that, I don't want to forget that that I also work with kids who are neurodivergent. And just so that everybody understands what neurodivergence means, it's basically another umbrella term. So people who have like ADHD, people who have autism, people who may have some sort of learning disability, they usually fall under that category. And I've worked with them as well, right? We usually call them like developmentally delayed. But much of my work with a lot of the kids, like for example, um, I've worked with them, whether helping them with like sports stuff and just open up opportunities for our kids to get active. Definitely have been able and been honored to do a lot of like a lot of clubs. Like for example, we had a black, well, you can say Afrocentric club where myself and another partner of mine, another colleague of mine, not only have we been able to teach about, the history of Black people in Canada and also where things are going currently, but what we also have been trying to do is put like, some life skills as a part of it. Understanding how, for example, food is connected to history and what it has meant for the survival of our people. you know, there's a reason why we season things up. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Um, stuff like that, because we found that the behaviors of the kids at the school that I was working at, um, in part, it was almost like they never understood who they were,
Mm,
right? And so we want to reintroduce the fact that, hey, listen, it's not just because you're Black, but we want to empower them to realize that you're Black and you're important, and you
mm,
need to act like as if you're important. You can't like just run around and think you can do whatever, right? You are valuable, you are worthy, you are special. And it was important for us to impart that knowledge and impart that empowerment to the next generation so that they themselves can grow up to be leaders in their communities.
wow. Awesome work. It's definitely necessary, especially, there's so many different things happening with the children these days that this type of work is super important.
Mhm.
It's easy to
Mhm.
get caught up with the social media and everything with the kids.
Oh, it's man, and that I think right now this is kind of where the mental health of our kids are in a not very great state. Um, and I think technology has been like a lot of the driving force behind it. Um, I've always argued that social media, while there are some benefits to it, um, has not really been great for the overall health and really outlook for our kids. They're seeing imagery. One thing I've said that social media and people who are on social media, they have the power to control the narrative, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Which means that um, they can present themselves as successful or they're doing stuff, right? And it's not to say, the people on the pictures are not being real about, where they're at. You see the fashion, you see the cars, you see the clothes, you see them going on trips and everything. Same one showing off their bodies a certain way and blah, 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 right? But a lot of these kids are being exposed to it, and now they're having to compare themselves to the people on screen, right?
Yeah.
Which is not good because what you see on screen half the time is not even really all that real, right? All you need is a certain angle, a certain way, or put yourself in front of like a Lamborghini or whatever, and just put in a 1-2 caption, and
That's
and boom, you get like so many, and people are doing it for the likes,
Yeah.
right? People are doing it for the likes. It's gotten to the point where even technology, like a lot of kids have not done well in terms of communication. I'll give you an example. I don't know why I'm going off in this tangent, but I might as well go here.
Let's go.
It's interesting where back when we were growing up, right? Anybody who's like 90s and like down, like 90s, 80s, 70s, right? Like if you're having the conversation in like face to face, right? I've seen too many times where people are having conversations with each other over text
Yep.
and they're literally right beside each other.
Yep.
Like something's wrong there.
Yep.
Something is like definitely wrong. And a lot of our kids are growing up in such a way that even resolving like conflicts or whatever, conflicts are not happening like in school. The conflicts are happening online.
Yep.
And it's a dangerous situation. This is why, in a lot of ways, that, when you look at the poor mental health and the cyberbullying, for example, that happens a
Mhm.
lot online, there is a correlation to how a lot of the kids are having poor mental health because they're being exposed to a lot of like the very dark sides when it comes to social media, group chats and everything.
Yeah. I,
Yeah.
I have to agree. And you know what? There's a lot of adults that are caught up in that web too.
Oh, yeah.
It's,
Mhm.
it is a slippery slope,
Mhm.
social media, if you don't have the right shoes on, because you can
Mhm.
get caught up real easy.
Mhm.
If you don't have the right mindset as well. Like if you're out here doing all the wrong things for the wrong reasons.
Listen, I've seen, I kid you not, like I've seen, and again, kind of going back to how kids are using social media. I had this one student in particular. She put out a she kind of put out a post, and I forgot which platform it was, but she put out a post saying that I guess she had a crush on some guy.
Mhm.
Now, again, we're talking about somebody that's not even grade 9 yet, right? Had some crush on a guy and explicitly said that she would go down on him if she had the chance. Now, obviously, she deleted it, but the problem is that word went out.
Yep.
And again, I want to say this, if there's any young person that's listening to this, the problem that you have with that, even if you delete it, it's not deleted. It
Nope.
really isn't.
Nope.
One is out there, it's out there, you
Yep.
know. And if you're not careful, like it can come back to haunt you. So this is why you have to be careful of how you conduct yourself in that space.
100%. Big warning. Big
Mhm.
warning to the youths out there for sure.
Mhm.
Geez, I mean, we could talk about social media and the dangers of being online forever because there's just so many things. I mean, social media can be used for good things as well, but it's all about how you utilize those platforms, right?
Right. Yeah.
Hmm. But talk to us about being a therapist because you're also a therapist as well. So bring us on that journey, how that all started, and what it means to be a therapist and how important it is, especially in our community where
Yeah.
people hear the word therapy and they're like, "What?"
So it's funny. I've always wanted to do the therapy thing, right?
Mhm.
But and I guess it's me, my own imposter syndrome. I just felt like I wasn't ready, right? I felt like I needed like, to have more credentials, more tools or whatever. Like the person I'm working with, she's first of all, she's well known.
Mhm.
And this is the person that I've known because we've grown up in church, right? And so she's been asking me to be a part of this team. And I'm just like, yeah, I want to, and I want to, but I just gotta, get a few things ready, blah, 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 blah. It wasn't until I injured myself, like bad,
Mhm.
that I had to like be like, you know what? Maybe I should like maybe reach out. Like it was God telling me it's like, no, you think you're not ready, you're ready,
Mm.
right? Um, and honestly, like for me, and it comes back to the whole issue around, you know, having to be a voice, another voice in the mental health space, especially for our community. Our community has been underserved badly, right, when it comes to mental health. Some of it's our own doing, right? And this is kind of why therapy is beneficial because there's a lot of things that, well, let me backtrack. I said in the beginning that we as Black people have been born into oppression,
Mhm.
right? We've been born into oppression. And that oppression will look like how we are treated in the healthcare system, how we've been treated in the educational system, how we've generally been treated on the job, certainly in the justice system. And this is not also to negate the fact that there are some atrocities that we have done to ourselves over the years, over many generations, you know,
Mhm.
and we sweep them badly under the rug. Part of it is that, and I don't know if you ever experienced this, but I remember so many times where, you know, people we would basically know that somebody is quote unquote sick in their head, but we don't want to be like at the time, we don't want to be how the white people act.
Yep,
Yeah. You understand what I'm saying?
100%.
A lot of the times, if you see somebody crazy, like back when I was growing up, it was gonna be a white person.
Yep.
And we're already dealing with a whole bunch of stuff. We as Black people don't want to be looked upon as crazy on top of it. Not
Not at
true?
all. Yep,
Not true?
100%. Yep.
And so and so we are easily sweep those things under the rug. We don't want it to be known. I would even go further to say, how many times have we known somebody that has unfortunately violated some of our kids? But we will protect that uncle or that auntie or that community leader or that pastor,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um, we will protect them before we would protect our kids.
Yep.
We want to protect the reputation of our family, quote unquote.
Hmm.
And that has left a lot of kids, a lot of adults who were kids in a space where now they're having to fight virtually like a lot of demons, a lot of depression, a lot of
Yep.
anxiety because of the atrocities that have been done within our community. And it's been swept under, it's been disregarded, it's been denied, all that type of stuff. And so for me as a therapist, um, when talking to some of my clients, most of the men, by the way, um, there are some things that I realize, um, it's funny. There's some things that have confirmed what
Hmm.
we've always talked about.
Yep.
When you hear it, it is both confirming but also very sad. It's
Yep.
like, why are we doing this to ourselves?
Hmm.
How can we do this to ourselves? Right? And especially for a lot of men. And thank God there are starting to be more men that want to speak to somebody because this whole thing around patriarchy and misogyny has really done damage to how men are to relate to women, to children, basically to themselves as well. And there's a lot of things to try to deconstruct and try to unpack. There's also the reality that a lot of men, particularly Black men, have really been violated, like
Hmm.
violated, when it comes to how they were raised. And I'm talking about everything from sexual assault to neglect and abandonment. And a lot of these men are growing up like very angry, if not somewhat confused. Because again, what happens a lot is that men are taught basically to figure things out on their own. They never really have the space to actually talk about how they feel in fear that they will be disregarded or made fun of or looked upon as less than. And this happens, and unfortunately, it somewhat continues to happen. And this is why, a lot of people, men and women, but particularly men in our community in particular, are very hesitant to actually want to get therapy because it's the whole stigma of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? There's a lot of to unpack with this conversation, even with just navigating the damage that has been done,
Hmm.
especially around just as you mentioned, being violated.
Hmm.
As men, you guys are the backbone of our community. You're the head of the household, And
Hmm.
so when that person does not feel that way, it's hard to have a strong family unit. It's hard to have that. So, like, why is it so important? Like, as you mentioned, there's a lot of individuals, a lot of gentlemen that are coming forward and they're speaking about
Hmm.
the different things that they've experienced at this time, which is so important. But why do you think um, we carry this shame in the Black community, or what is the stigma that we're carrying that will allow us to, you know, keep that uncle or that aunt or that pastor, safe instead of protecting the child?
It's funny. There and there's a lot to unpack. So, like for example, um, comes back to the whole patriarchy argument. And I will admit that am somewhat on the fence on this a little bit because again, I've lived under a traditional household, right? That's all I've known and whatnot, that has benefits and whatnot. But that being said, um, I think sometimes when we were growing up, again, for us who were of a certain age or a certain era, us as kids were seen but not heard, right? And so even if there was something happening, sometimes what I found is that we weren't automatic. Like if back then, if I was like 10 years old, something happened, um, I don't know if I would be fully believed, right? Because of the view of how children are being viewed.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny, I just finished the session with a young man, and you know, one of the things that is true, our parents have done what they could, the best they could to raise us. But what's also true is that what they did was not good enough. A lot of the times it missed the mark. I think the other reason to your point, to your question as to why we don't is that, for us, we do we talk about people a lot. We really do.
Mhm.
Like we're a big community, but we're not a big community. We're a small community. And so you always hear the chitter chatter of, yo, you hear what happened to sister so and so? You hear what happened to Missy? All that type of stuff, right? You hear what happened to Fitz? You know, that the thing, right? And so that gossip a lot of the times, I'm not saying it's the main thing, but I think a lot of the times we are trying to protect an image that's not really real. And therefore, even with the atrocities, because what happens is if you're going to expose that uncle for violating somebody's daughter or somebody's son, right? Then that brings into question what's been happening with the whole family, right? It's like, yeah, you mean say you have like rapists? Well, I wouldn't go that with rapists, but at the same time, people will talk bad about other people. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying this as a defense of people who are protecting. I think anybody who knows somebody that's doing that should also, in a sense, be held accountable because you're doing damage to the victims that are there. But what I am also saying is that we're allowing that stigma of being talked about or being isolated from the community to almost dictate and drive um not dictate basically how we respond when stuff happens within the community, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it
Mhm.
makes perfect sense.
And unfortunately, the people that suffer under it are generally the people that have been violated. Our kids, our girls, our boys. And it's funny because this is really the thing that drives home why mental health is important. Because much of our trauma, more often than not, has started when we were young,
Mhm.
right? That's the thing that we have to remember. A lot of us as kids have at least seen or know somebody that has gone through a significant trauma, right?
Mhm.
And they're growing up through this life angry, depressed, fearful, right? Sometimes confused. And they have to grow up into adults carrying this all this time. They can't talk to anybody about it because, at best, they can talk about it, but they don't have the language to actually speak to what's been going on, right? And so, and I'll point out to men, is it any wonder why a lot of our men, a lot of our young men have been people who um, are the ones that are addicted to whether drugs or alcohol or do some sort of like damaging behaviors, or men that leave, you know, their families and all that type of stuff. Like, is it any wonder why sometimes you would see a mom also, getting into very dangerous behaviors or abandoning their kids and stuff? These are things that we need to shed a light on so that we can heal.
Mhm. And that's a good point to make because there's always a history to somebody's behavior patterns. And
Mhm.
sometimes we see people and we're like, why would they do that? Or why is this happening? But really, there's a lot to unpack in that person's story. We really don't know what they could possibly be dealing with.
Oh yeah. Like I don't normally say this, but I will just give this one illustration just to kind of bring it home. I know somebody very, very dear to my heart, very, very, very close. And when I met him, I knew there was like an issue, but you know, obviously it wasn't said what it was or whatever, right? Um, I knew that there was something wrong because he didn't want to be around like crowds or anything like that. He just basically isolated himself, you know? And so, you know, these past few months, next thing you know, we find him having psychotic episodes, right? And part of the reason why he was having some very severe psychotic episodes, generally speaking, was the fact that his father had passed away, right? A few years back. And he had not been able to reconcile, the fact that his father's gone, right? That his father had passed away. And so he didn't talk to anybody. He pretty much isolated himself and got into some sort of behaviors that have been dangerous. And again, because he didn't talk to anybody or he at least see a therapist or something, he ended up really having some psychotic episodes. We had to basically really take him to the hospital because it was a lot, right? Now he's at a place where he's better. He's working through it, right? But it does go to show that like if there are some things that happen, traumatic things that happen, don't try to figure it out on your own. Like, do not put yourself in a situation where you're trying to figure it out on your own. You do not want to compile the problem by trying to handle it on your own. Our minds are there's no one that I've met that has went through some stuff that has handled it on their own and lived long, if that makes sense. You just don't do that to yourself.
Mhm. So talk to us about therapy and, how important it is to
Mhm.
talk about our problems because, in our community, as we mentioned, we like to hide things and put on a face that shows that, we're fine and everything's okay, but it's important for us to talk. So tell us about it.
So therapy, just to break it down to its very like the very common denominator is just having a safe space to talk, right? No judgment. Um, Therapy, when you're working with a therapist, you're allowed to express your thoughts and your feelings. We're the ones that are coming alongside you to help you both mentally and emotionally. We will ask some questions, but the questions, and I always tell my clients, listen, the questions that we're asking is not for our information. It's for you to actually sit down and really sit down and reflect on what's happening, right? Therapy is great from the standpoint that you have somebody that's there to support you that will actually have the language to depict everything that's happening. Um, and also be able to give you some tools that will kind of help you to cope and to manage, whether it be the depression, whether it be the anxiety, whether it be like the grief, right? But that's what generally therapy is, right? It's a safe space. And again, I'm going to say this, even if you don't subscribe to therapy, I get that. But ask yourself this question: who, or at least what are the places that you can go to that are safe for you to talk? That is the main question. More often than not, we're holding things in that have been bugging us. And because whether we don't trust people or we're afraid of the stigma, we're trying to handle things on our own. And what ends up happening more often than not is that we're coping through substances that only are more of an escape than it is a tool to get you up and over, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah. So, how does one know that they actually need to see a therapist?
Well, generally speaking, you have to kind of look at your own behaviors. If, for example, generally speaking, if you find yourself, let's say, for example, that your behaviors or your moods have drastically changed, and it's been festering, let's say, for like 2+ weeks or whatever, that's an indication that you may have to go see somebody, right? If you find that the activities that you normally do that give you joy all of a sudden are not bringing you joy after a certain period of time, you may have to see a therapist. If you find yourself if you find yourself in a situation where you're becoming more nervous or more stressed than you normally would, right? And again, timing is everything because people are thinking, like, say, maybe a day here or a day there. That's not necessarily the case, right? Like, everybody goes through maybe about nervousness every once in a while, but we're talking about persistent um, behaviors and moods and negative thought patterns that have been persistent over weeks or at least over months. Those are the indications that will tell you that, you know what, you need to see a therapist. And heck, I will also flip it this way because we always look at therapists or the need for a therapist as something where like some like life, um, like a change in life or something dramatic has happened. Not necessarily. I got people that want to talk to a therapist just because they just need to hear a different perspective, right? Sometimes they just need a checkup. That's the reason why I got my therapist because I need that checkup, right? But it's also important that people at least be in a space where it's safe for them to talk. And if you don't have that space, find it.
Mhm. And so you mentioned you were, raised in the church
Mhm.
and you're a believer. So
Mhm.
talk to us about that community, the church community and therapy, because
Mhm.
I know sometimes people in the church, not everybody is the
Mhm.
same, but some people in the church would be like, you have God, talk
Mhm.
to God, and
Yep.
he will solve all your problems and
Mhm.
everything. So talk to us a bit about that.
It's funny you should say that because I'm supposed to be doing a workshop next
Uh-oh.
month about that. So here's what I'm gonna say. Um, I am a strong believer of the supremacy of God. God works miracles, right? There's nothing God can do, including our own mental health. I think the misconception is that we almost treat God as he is not concerned with our mind in a sense, right? But if you look out throughout scripture, he's actually concerned about our head space first before the actions. Having that said, right? I think the misconception when it comes to therapy, when it comes to our faith, is more so geared to what therapy is, and not necessarily. We have this fear that, like, if we're in therapy, it takes away from our faith in God's miracle working power or whatever. I argue this, and I heard somebody say this before. We go to we go to our doctors, okay, to do a physical checkup, right?
Mhm.
Think of therapy in the same way as sort of like a mental checkup, right? Here's another thing that we also need to consider, and it comes back to the relation. God has made us relational, right? There has not been that, at least I can remember in scripture, where um where somebody who's isolated um has been able to do well, if that makes sense, right? Um, this is why, we talk about, bury one another's burdens, and I'm just using scripture here, right? As a principle. There is a principle to say, we have to learn to come alongside people, right? We may not be able to solve, we know God solves, but sometimes we also forget. Sometimes God puts people in our path to help us along this journey, right? Um, and also, I will also even say this, right? Therapy has evolved to the point where therapists are can be from every different genre you can think of. Like the therapist I have, she's a Christian,
Mhm.
period. Right? And so, oh, well, actually, let me backtrack so that you guys can understand. When I first actually started looking for a therapist, I actually went through my employee assistant program, and I was able to meet up with, a nice white lady, and, she gave some nice tips, but I felt like I couldn't really talk the way, I wanted to talk, right? Because there's just some things that she didn't like really
Get
like
it.
understand. She tried,
Yeah.
but it wasn't until like I met up with my own therapist who both was in the church, right?
Mhm.
And also was Black. So there were things that I can actually freely speak to that she would automatically understand. And I think when it comes to therapy and 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 the church, I want to reassure that, like, for anybody that is a part of therapy or whatever, it does not take away your faith in the Lord. It doesn't, and it shouldn't, right? But again, it's about being in those spaces where somebody could actually speak to the very same thing that you might be suffering with. It could be imposter syndrome. It could be generalized anxiety. It could be PTSD, right? It could be some sort of manic depression. But as clinicians, we're just trained to identify what exactly you're dealing with and how to go about it.
Mm. Okay.
And I will also say, not to belabor the point, a lot of the clients that I have, we go to church. We're talking some scripture here, right? But again, this is where people feel comfortable, right? And we can openly talk about it. So I'll leave it at that, though.
Yes. Okay. So anybody who is looking for a therapist definitely got to reach out to you, right? For sure. But visibility is something in our community that is extremely important.
Mhm,
So this conversation is very refreshing.
mhm.
It's open and honest, and it's important for people to be able to look at you having this open and honest conversation and realize that it is important. So talk
Yep.
to us about visibility, not only for people our age, but the
Mhm.
youngers coming up as well.
Yes. So visibility is important. And a lot of it is that we have to embrace, not we have to embrace, but for the longest while, especially, with mental health, um, you don't see enough of our people in the community, um, and which takes away from like the culturally appropriate methodologies for our clients. So representation does become important from a standpoint that for the client, it's not just about like the face. The face is one thing, right? But it's about identify with somebody that can also speak to the very same thing that you're going through, right? This is why I talk about, my experience with seeing a therapist, right? And before I was like, okay, I'll take anybody. But then I realized, what I really needed was somebody that actually understood my language, right? Representation, especially overall, is important because for a lot of people, right? And I'll actually even say um, male psychotherapists and male psychologists. You don't see a lot of us. You really don't. And it is also needed. Thank God for a lot of the Black women that has like really been at the forefront in, talking about mental health and being that support system to many people of all colors, to talk to. But Black men also are needed. And they're slowly starting to come up. But at the end of the day, representation matters because, for that son or even for that daughter that's looking for at least a male figure that looks like them, that talks like them, that understands what they're saying, it is also just as important. And I'm happy to be part of, even though it's a small fraternity, but there are some Black men out there that are doing the work and really opening up doors for people to talk about mental health in a very safe and free way.
Mhm. That's important. And of course, vulnerability is where it's at, being
Yep.
vulnerable, right? So
Yeah.
um give us like a, I don't know if it's some kind of word, some words that would help to encourage people when it comes to being vulnerable.
Here's the thing. I know, I know that vulnerability has been frowned upon in so many ways, right? Um, and I get it. For some of you that are listening to this, sometimes your vulnerability has been weaponized in some way, shape, or form. But here's what I will tell you. If you are not able to be vulnerable with yourself, if you're not able to at least be open, um, and be honest about where you're at, then you're putting yourself and the people that you love more in danger, more so in the vulnerable state. Because as much as we like to think that we're in control, when lifes, when things like go sideways, you don't really know yourself until like, the proverbial ish hits the fan. And when you find yourself a lot more irritated with your family, your children, your spouse, your parents, when you find yourself in a situation where all of a sudden you want to um, fight somebody, or even more so when you look at yourself and you're drowning in a sea of regret, where you feel like you can't live, those are the times where you trying to be strong in all this goes out the window. And sometimes what ends up happening is that if you don't voluntarily be vulnerable, you will find yourself in a very vulnerable position. And so it is going to be very important for anybody that's listening to this. If you know that you have not been in a great headspace and you're looking for help, the help is available. It's growing. Even if it's not therapy, there are starting to be some support groups that you can go to. There are people out there that are actually needing and looking for the type of support where you can come alongside men or women who are basically on the same journey as you. But it is going to be up to you to find those things.
Mhm. For real. Geez, oh my gosh. Okay, so but you also do this podcast. Talk to us about this podcast that you got
Oh,
going
Black People's checking.
on.
So shout out to Mandela. We actually did this podcast at the time when George Floyd got executed.
Oh, wow.
And it was such an impact on us as a Black community. And mind you, I met Mandela through a previous relationship, I will say. And so it connected it basically connected from there. Like we connected live, doing like live IG, talks and stuff, and people were really starting to like it, right? And from there, it just basically turned into a podcast, right? And really, the premise of our podcast is, you have two Black men that talk about their experiences with mental health under the umbrella of the Canadian context, right? We'll talk about like a lot of stuff like pop culture, news, and everything, and how it impacts Black people in general, right? So that's what we try to do. We're just pretty much out here trying to be unique in that you don't normally see Black men, especially in Canada, especially on a podcast, really talk about that stuff. And we've been honored to have some pretty dope guests. So again, all I'm just saying, if you want to just check us out, mind you, let me just warn you, we're pretty raw. We're pretty raw. Well, I will sell more Mandela, if anything.
Okay.
But really, for the most part, you can check us out on Spotify and Apple Music or wherever you get your podcasts. Again, Black people check in, we're out here.
Okay, Black people check in. And so if we definitely wanted to reach out to you with respects to therapy,
Mhm.
talk to us about how we stay connected with you.
Sure. So I have a couple of mediums. So check me out on the socials. So check me out on IG, which is JERMS Germs 394. So you can follow me on that. You can also follow me on TikTok. I am at Mr. Car Talk on TikTok. So you can follow me there. And if you're looking to book a session or at least a consultation, email me actually. Just go to hello at francispsychotherapy.com. Okay, that's hello at francispsychotherapy.com. And we can do a consultation. I do work with a great team. I mean, a great team of very knowledgeable, very experienced, very personable clinicians. Shout out to Roxanne Francis, by the way. And and we're just here to just, again, lend our voices and lend our experience to help those that are dealing with whatever mental illness that they're suffering with.
Mhm. And so, do you guys do in person and online, or is it just in person?
So we do both. I personally I will do both. I am in the Durham region, so my office will be, in person on particular days. However, if you guys are not traveling there, which I know half of y'all from Brampton and Mississauga will not do so, you can definitely do online. So I do both, and in Francis Psychotherapy, that's the same thing. They basically do both. But we want to make sure that we lend our support in any way we can to our community and to really the entire community, entire like people of Ontario at large.
Awesome. Okay, guys, so make sure that you guys check in. Hello at francispsychotherapy.com. Okay, you could follow him on Instagram and on TikTok as well. So of course, I just want to thank you so much for this open and honest conversation. Very important that, you were able to just share with us because you just brought so much light to a lot of things that I'm sure individuals are thinking about, right?
I appreciate this and thank you for having me.
No worries. So before you leave, I just want to know if you have one last word, like a motivational or inspirational quote, something that you kind of go by on a daily basis.
Um, I'm just gonna say this. No one does life alone. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you feel alone, you can get help. I will, especially to men, I will say this. The good thing about it is that there is a growing number of people and clinicians that are here to help you and to serve you. It is going to be up to you to choose to do the right thing and get some help. No one does this life alone. You don't need to do that either.
And that's a whole word. All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Jermaine. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure if you jumped in at any point in between this, you go all the way back to the beginning of the show because he was dropping some major gems, also giving us a lot of definitions between different aspects of things like mental illness versus mental health. So make sure that you guys check it all out, grab your pen and your notepad, take some notes, and touch base with Jermaine if you need to get any assistance. He's definitely here to help. All right. And make sure you guys remember, you know, no one does this life alone. All right. Okay. Thank you so much. And I'll see you guys next week, same time, same place.
Take care, guys.